Welcome, folks. I am Jabby Kuwait, and we're going to look at the Moon Knight Episode 1 breakdown, Easter eggs, and details you missed from New Rockstars. Thank you, New Rockstars, for allowing me to react to this. Very, very much appreciate it. Some of you participated in the live stream conversation at youtube.com/JabbyLive. You don't need to subscribe to that if you don't want to. Nothing's really going on there. Just hanging out and shooting the shit. So I'm not encouraging anyone to go subscribe there. There were some people who chatted at me going, yo, Jabby, Eric Voss called you out. He didn't like what you said about him, talking shit. So I got a little bit panicky as I looked at the video that was in reference. It was a Doctor Strange video. I didn't think I upset him, but my audience convinced me that I did on the live stream. And so I emailed Eric Voss. I'm like, yo, I don't know if this is about me, but I am so sorry if I upset you, blah, blah, blah. I really appreciate what you do. So he emailed me back that evening and he goes, that had nothing to do with you. We like what you do. Don't worry. I said, okay, cool. I didn't upset you. Awesome. Let's see if we can fix that. So, let's jump into this. I'm just joking. Let's jump into this reaction. By the way, if you're curious about the live stream channel, this is not in any way a means to get you to subscribe over there. I don't care if you do. youtube.com/JabbyLive. We're not doing much over there, to be honest. We're literally just hanging out from time to time, looking at memes and shooting the shit. It's literally that basic. So,
welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Eric Voss, and this is a breakdown of Marvel's Moon Knight Episode 1 as we meet our hero grappling with dissociative identity disorder, and one of those identities possessed by an Egyptian moon deity, which gives us all a new cover story for when we obliterate our friends' bathrooms. I swear it was Khonshu who shit in the tub. As we always do here at New Rockstars, we're gonna break this down in depth because unlike other MCU titles, Moon Knight is less about the Marvel Easter eggs than it is truly impressive cinematic details that make this series a fascinating mystery and character exploration. Also, our merch partners have dropped new Moon Knight inspired hoodies and shirts, a cool looking new latest obsession design, and when you get one of those, you'll get the added option to write in a custom shout out that will appear on screen in our Moon Knight after shows, so get your hands on one of those at newrockstarsmerch.com. The episode opens not with the hero, but with the villain, Arthur Harrow. Tattooed on his arm are scales head in the mouths of crocodiles, those croc heads also on the head of his staff for the Egyptian deity he serves, Ammit, a funeral figure associated with judgment, seen with the head of a crocodile, front legs of a lion, and hindquarters of a hippopotamus. The Egyptians believe that when you die, the god of the dead, Anubis, weighs your heart on scales against the weight of a feather, and if it weighs more, you're fed to Ammit. Ammit was not worshipped as a god per se, but feared by Egyptians as the devourer of the dead.
Seems like you'd always lose. It weighs your heart against a feather. I wonder, I would imagine a heart would always weigh more than a feather.
Dooming them if they didn't adhere to the principle of Ma'at, which referred to a way of life that pursued truth and balance and justice. Philosophically, there's actually a lot in common here with Thanos, another MCU villain with a religious zeal to cull all of life by half. But whereas Thanos saw fairness in randomness, Harrow and his disciples believed that one's soul should be judged on its merits, past, present, and future. At least you can imagine in a post-Thanos society, one's fate being determined by a bit more order is a cult mentality Kool-Aid flavor more folks would like the taste of. In his ritual, he shatters a glass and then puts the broken pieces in his sandals, walking on them with bare feet. Now, walking on broken glass is a real-world meditative practice, but Harrow hides this inside his shoes, spending the whole day enduring great pain, but telling no one. This tells us that he is not doing this for show. He is a true believer.
Wait, that's a real meditative practice? Walking on glass? Ugh. I watched this in the comfort of my home with Achara Kirk, as you guys saw if you watched the reaction video, but I also watched it again at a screening with an audience at the, which theater is that? Somewhere in Hollywood, one of the famous theaters in Hollywood. I always forget the name of it. I confuse all of them. But anyway, yeah, so I saw it at a screening, which Oscar Isaac and Ethan Hawke were at. I got to talk to the director as well. He's super, super nice. Anyway, to hear the audience reaction to Ethan Hawke putting on the slippers and walking with the glass in his feet. What's amazing about this is you don't actually see him walking with glass in his feet. You see the glass go into the slippers, you see his feet go into the slippers, and you hear him walking. It's all sound effects when you think about it. And it's just the idea in your mind that's kind of grody. The audience collectively went, oh, ooh. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty awesome. That's like really, really smart filmmaking, because like you don't even see what's happening, but it still messes you up inside.
The music we hear is Bob Dylan's Every Grain of Sand, one of Dylan's 80s these spiritual tracks recorded after he found Jesus, became a born-again Christian. Kind of like how Arthur Harrow sees himself as a reborn evangelist. Every grain of sand refers to how Dylan saw the master's hand in every tiny particle of nature. And for Harrow, in every person, he sees Emmett's judgment. That could be another reason he walks on this broken glass. With every step, he pulverizes this glass back into grains of sand. Because that's what glass is. It's sand when it's superheated. The Marvel Studios title card has been updated so that now our new friends, the Eternals, can be seen on the inside of the R behind Rocket. And by the way, they put Rocket back where Peter Parker was in the No Way Home title card because Peter can only appear in live action titles that Sony approves of. And by approves of, I mean get some money to pay for their poopy vampire movies. And suddenly, the music changes from Bob Dylan to Engelbert Humperdinck's A Man Without Love, which is about a man who wakes up every day realizing he's alone. The first line actually juxtaposes Steven's inability to remember his past love, Layla, and the third line reflects how moonlight now shows him the way via his new soulmate, one that he is not yet aware of, Khonshu, the Egyptian moon deity. And we meet Stephen Grant. Now in the comics, Stephen Grant is actually the second identity of Marc Spector. Marc is really the main figure, the badass mercenary that we start with, and Stephen is a new identity he adopts, that of an elite billionaire. But I assume this series changed Stephen to this awkward museum employee to avoid the Batman Bruce Wayne comparisons. Because when Moon Knight first came out in the Marvel Comics, a lot of people considered him Marvel's Batman. Now behind Stephen's...
regarding that, I actually like the direction that they took. I mean, I have no dog in this fight. Moon Knight is completely new to me. And so for me, just diving in with episode 1, I really, really enjoy Stephen's character. Whatever they changed there, I think worked in the show's favor. But I say this as someone who hasn't read the comic yet.
Behind Stephen's bed as he awakes are a number of texts on world history and architecture, ancient Egypt, etc. These books hovering over his head as he sleeps reflect how his dreams, or what he thinks are his dreams, take him back to that world. Now in the foreground, you can see his Rubik's Cube completed, which is interesting because while trying to stay awake, Stephen intentionally fiddles with it and tosses it, never finishing it, suggesting that when the Marc identity takes over, he might go ahead and solve the Rubik's Cube. We see how he strapped his leg to the bed and surrounded himself with sand, all as a kind of sleepwalking security measure. But his first real step forward of the day is his bare foot on sand, which the camera lingers on, showing he is more connected to the sands of Egypt than Harrow, whose first step of his day is on larger chunks of glass.
It's interesting to me what he said about Marc completing the Rubik's Cube. I'm like, first off, that theory is awesome because it makes sense. Like you see him working it and then you see it's completed. But Marc Spector strikes me as this person who is just insanely busy with so much shit to do. Why would he spend any time working on a Rubik's Cube? Is the only question that pops into my head. But maybe in between, kicking the asses, he has to, solve a Rubik's Cube or two just to satiate that craving for Rubik's Cube solving.
His goldfish Gus has only one working fin, like Nemo, a comparison the pet store owner later invokes. But with one working fin, this poor guy is literally swimming in circles just like Stephen is. And you can see at the bottom of the fish tank is lined with a pyramid, King Tut's head, an Egyptian obelisk, and a sunken boat. He talks to his mother on the phone, probably talking to no one.
Hello, Mum. It's me. Just checking in. I got your postcard. Putting it up on Gus's tank now.
Now, assuming Stephen's mother doesn't really exist, is he sending himself these postcards? Is Marc sending them to Stephen to help keep him in that dormant routine? Later on in the gift shop, we do see a rack of postcards, so perhaps this is where he's getting the postcards that he is mailing to himself. He says goodbye to his mom by saying,
Anyway, sorry I missed you, Mum. I'll try again tomorrow. Laters, gators.
Yes, crocodiles are different from alligators. We talked about this in Loki, but it will be later that he faces this taxonomic order of reptiles. But also, this all poses the question, if Stephen Grant is just another identity of Marc Spector, who does Stephen think he is talking on the phone to? Is he just leaving voicemails with a random number? Is there a voice inbox that Marc Spector set up to help Stephen along with this charade? It's just interesting how all of Stephen's closest relationships are people who cannot talk back to him, like the street performer Crawley.
Right.
Now behind that bus,
I just assumed that it was like a Fight Club situation or just a schizophrenic situation where it's literally just a voice in his head.
Behind that bus is a building marked Atlantis Island, maybe a nod to Marvel's Atlantis, home of Namor, or maybe just another building called Atlantis. They actually shot all the London exteriors in Budapest. So later when we see what's supposed to be London's National Museum of Art, the architecture is actually that of Budapest's Museum of Fine Arts. Right. They use VFX to swap out the Hungarian for English. And this museum is first shown in the reflection of a puddle that Stephen steps through. Reflections and mirrored surfaces are a recurring motif in this series, all a way of showing how Stephen connects connects with his other identities. Steven catches a girl stuffing her gum in a mini pyramid of Giza.
It's not like there's anything in there.
Yeah, maybe not. But in there, something wicked.
A line foreshadowing in two ways. Of course, the wicked jackal that Steven will flee in this museum later, but also trailer footage suggests that Steven or Mark will explore the Great Pyramids of Giza and they might find something inside of them. Also, something wicked is a quote from Shakespeare's Macbeth, the witches who say, "By the pricking of my tomes, something wicked this way comes." In the play, the witches are foreseeing a monster of their own making, Macbeth, just like how for Steven, the hero of this story, the monster is currently inside of him. He explains the Egyptian burial ritual and how their hearts were judged, and the girl responds with,
And did it suck for you? Getting rejected from the field of reeds?
Well, that don't make sense, because I'm not dead, am I?
Stevie.
Am I?
Yeah, I love that second, am I? That Oscar Isaac sneaks
I didn't
in,
catch
showing
that.
how this girl triggered his recent lapses with reality. Even now, he doesn't know if he's alive or dead. Also, weird question for that girl to ask. I don't trust that kid. Later, while doing inventory with Donna, he hands her the stuffed hippos, then moves to a box containing the stuffed lions and the stuffed crocodiles. Together, these three are the anatomical components of Emmett.
Oh,
he points to
wow.
a flaw on the poster.
The Ennead, you know, like the super group of Egyptian gods, you know, you got Horus, Osiris, Tefnut, Shu.
Stop.
There's been a major blunder because they've got 7 gods here and the Ennead has 9.
Now, he is correct that the Ennead of Egyptian mythology has 9 members. The sun god Atum, his children Shu and Tefnut, their children Geb and Nut, and then their children Osiris, Isis, and Set and Nephthys. And then sometimes the Ennead includes Horus, son of Osiris and Isis. But this poster also lists Hathor, the sky goddess, who is not usually listed among the Ennead, despite being a very important deity who, we should note, mates with Khonshu, the moon deity, to enable creation. But based on promo material, we will likely see the 9 members of the Ennead and their human avatars later this season. Steven chats
cool.
with his gold-painted street performer listed in the credits as Crawley. Now in the comics, Bertrand Crawley is a homeless man in New York who serves as an informant to Moon Knight. He walks around posing as a British aristocrat. We get another awesome puddle mirror here as Steven says goodbye to Crawley. What we initially think is right side up is actually upside down when a leaf drops on the puddle on the top half of the frame. As Steven tries to stay awake, in his textbook there's a mention of the Great Rift, gods turn away from man, which feels like it's setting up this show's mythology with Khonshu and the 9 Ennead members' relationship to mankind. We're essentially adding a new layer to the MCU plan of implying all gods of human society from the history we know are interwoven with the Marvel mythology, as we saw with the Asgardians' connections with Norse mythology and the Eternals' connections with all other forms of mythology. We have yet to see how the Christian religion ties into all of that, but my friends, Mephisto is coming.
Yeah.
But if this textbook is supposed to be showing the familial lineage of the Ennead, even if it's going youngest to oldest, it does seem a bit out of order. It's just a bit odd to list Osiris first, whatever order you would go in. But remember, all of this is through the eyes of Steven, who's certainly knowledgeable about Egyptian mythology, but he does have an unstable mind. He is an unreliable narrator, a point of view character through whom we are not seeing objective reality necessarily. So who knows how much of this presented reality is actually real and how much of it is going to be revealed as a fantasy at some point. He tosses up his Rubik's Cube and he suddenly finds himself face down, jaw dislocated in the hills beside an alpine
what that
village.
was?
This is actually shot in Slovenia. So apparently when Steven
I was
fell
always
asleep,
wondering,
Marc Spector
watching it twice, I was wondering why his face was smushed in like that. I mean, it was obviously some kind of CG. It looked like, I didn't know if it was just because he was like sleeping for a long time and that's why his face looked kind of like that.
took over, went to the Alps to steal the scarab from this castle, then leapt out the window, and Steven woke up on the ground. A voice speaks to him.
Go back to sleep, worm.
Yes, this is F. Murray Abraham as Khonshu. Interesting that he calls Steven the worm, as if Steven is the invasive critter that does not belong inside the mind. Khonshu, of course, the Egyptian moon deity, possessed Marc Spector, choosing him as his avatar, giving Marc supernatural powers, but he has less control over Marc's Steven identity. In his pocket, he finds a golden scarab with the Egyptian hieroglyphics. You can actually see a closer look at these in the closing credits of the episode. We did our best to translate these, but they do contain a mix of known alphabet symbols and then other unknown ones. The right and the left halves of the scarab are mirrored, so if you look at the dividing line in the middle and go to the column to the right of that, at the top of that, that is a reed, which translates to either an E or an I beside a seated figure. Beneath that, there's a scarab shape, then the open mouth, that's an R, then another I beside a different seated figure, then a pair of figures. The column to the right of that is topped with the quail chick that represents the U or the W, followed by another I. Beneath that, the vulture, that's an A, and then a figure I don't recognize that looks like either a boat or maybe an oil lamp, and then the horned viper that represents F, and then another figure I don't recognize. I'm gonna keep working on this, folks, but all you Egyptologists out there, hit me up. This series has been described as Indiana Jones meets Fight Club, and already you're seeing the parallels there, of course, especially Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, which had a whole set piece in a Germanic castle. But by sticking with one man's point of view, its consciousness suddenly switched into a totally different context.
I didn't remember
something that
that
we've seen actually in Christopher Nolan's Memento, which is also told in a non-linear narrative structure that reflected the mind of the protagonist who suffered from short-term memory loss. It resulted in him finding himself in intense moments with no knowledge of how he got there. Similarly, the FX series Legion, which actually follows the Marvel mutant of David Haller, also explores the intersection of superpowers with mental health struggles and leaves the viewer never quite sure of what is real or not.
If any of you guys have seen Legion and you think it's a great show, please let me know in the comments below. Just another fun thing to watch would be great.
Interesting how in the scene all the shooters speak to each other in English.
What's he doing? He's heading for the village.
Just a little indicator that these men in their matching clothes are likely not native to this alpine town, but rather, like many cults in the real world, move to these places to just kind of like take the town over with their interesting rajneeshny outfits. Steven pulls a Harrison Ford fugitive maneuver by joining the procession with some headgear to blend in.
Oh,
in this
weird.
case,
it looks similar too.
White being the color of Moon Knight's wardrobe. Arthur Harrow parts the crowd, showing his long, blown-out hair. Now, Harrow in the comics is really a one-off villain from one issue in 1985, a guy with a half-paralyzed face carrying out some Nazi experiments in Mexico. Really, I think this guy's gonna have a deeper identity that gets revealed later in the series.
Ooh.
Ethan Hawke said his version of the character is based on David Koresh, leader of the Christian cult, the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas. One follower submits himself for judgment.
I judge you in Amit's name with but a fraction of her power.
The tattoo scales sync with the swinging of the staff, which turn green to signal a balanced soul. Meanwhile, the old woman, the tattoo turns red, with one scale having a larger pile weighing it down.
I've been good my entire life.
I believe you, but the scales see everything. Perhaps it's something that lies ahead.
And so he drains her life force, leaving her skin gray. So Amit judges her by the sins she will commit in the future. And unless this is all bullshit, and let's be honest, it might be, this would be another example of destiny existing in the MCU. Something described in various ways by the Ancient One and He Who Remains in Loki. Like the TVA pruning young Sylvie, this woman is being punished for future violations. Both of these systems of justice cruelly denying the possibility of a multiverse where people can make infinitely different choices. Khonshu refuses to let Steven hand over the scarab.
Well, I would imagine that in this particular universe, all of the variables stack up in such a way that lead to the eventuality of that crime actually happening. There's still just some weird gray area about that in this sort of precog Minority Report style of crime solving, criminal catching and whatnot. It feels weird. If you caught Hitler as a baby, what would you do? I know what most of you guys would say. Give him a paintbrush. That's a weird history joke. Hitler wanted to be an artist. Anyway.
Kudos to Oscar Isaac for his physical work here, the way he can divorce his head and his facial expressions from the rest of his body. And then when he marches away from Harrow, he takes these big dramatic steps, similar to the big strides the towering Khonshu himself would take. As they pry the scarab from him, Steven flickers in and out of consciousness, coming to with blood on his face and fist. Just that amount of blood on the scarab in his palm is some of the gruesomest we've ever seen the MCU get, as it implies he may have had to rip off a few fingers to get that scarab out of their hands. He flees in a cupcake delivery van that plays Wham's Wake Me Up, another cry for help as Steven wishes to be woken up from this nightmare. The fact that this is played on the radio, maybe just a bit of an ironic joke, or just like an interesting coincidence that one might see in a dream. Stephen Grant wakes up for this thinking it's a dream, but as we find out later, it's not a dream. So why did such an ironic song play during it then? I just love how this show blurs the lines for what seems real and what seems fantasy. As he struggles against his pursuers, he flashes forward again and now finds the gun in his hand, the windshield blown out, the gunshot shattered the side window, and one of those pursuing cars flipping. I love how this whole scene plays out like a classic car chase, with one person steering, one person shooting, but with one man doing everything and only seeing half of it. Think how terrifying that would be. A logging truck overturns and he swerves around it, two more trucks wedge around him, and then Mark takes over again. Yeah, I like how on the transition out of it, you hear the gunshot, as if the gunshot is what woke Steven up. The gunshot that probably shot the driver of that sedan. But before the logs crush him, Steven wakes up, he thinks back home. Presumably, Mark was able to get out of that somehow, made his way back to the UK, back into the apartment, back into bed. And a shot from behind proves this, showing Steven with reflections on either side of him, proving his truly split identity. Yet his leg harness, the sand ring, the door tape, all seemingly undisturbed. But think about it, if it was another identity taking over, not him sleepwalking, walking, Marc would have been fully capable of avoiding the sand, replacing the tape himself. It's a huge pile of crumbled tape in that trash can. I highly doubt Steven counted all the watts. But Gus now has a second fully functioning fin. As indicated by the pet store clerk, Marc during that lapse period must have replaced the goldfish, kind of like parents who replace kids' goldfish when the fish die and they hope the kids don't notice. Steven realizes he missed his date at the steak restaurant because it's Sunday, not Friday.
I'll have a steak, please.
Sure.
I love this scene.
What cut would you like?
I'll have the best bit of the steak. That's the bit that I want.
Center cut's fillet. And how'd you like that?
Good. Yeah, very good. Very good.
It's heartbreaking.
I'll put you for well done.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, that sounds delicious.
It was weird in the theater, because like there were people laughing and I'm like, this is not funny at all to me. I mean, I saw there were some people who were taking it quite seriously, as you should, because it's awful what's happened to him, at least this version of him. But there were people who were like legit laughing in the theater. I'm like, this was not humorous to me at all. I felt really bad for him.
Oof, for anyone who eats steak, this is painful to watch. You never cook a fillet to be well done. You're ruining it.
I did think about that.
But obviously, Steven is a vegan, and Marc was the meat eater who picked this steakhouse to begin with. He finds some scratches on his apartment floor for where the table was dragged over to access the hidden crawl space, and on the cell phone that he finds, all the calls are to Layla, except one listing Ducamp. Jean-Paul Ducamp is a mercenary and ex-French Foreign Legion officer who is a partner to Marc Spector in the comics. Marc's voice speaks to him, and he sees the reflection in the bathroom mirror shaking his head when Steven hadn't done so. He flees to the elevator, which stops mysteriously on an empty third floor, and then again on the second, where Khonshu lurches toward him from the end of the hall. Terrifying horror imagery here. As in the comics, Khonshu has a beaked skull and a crescent moon staff, and his limbs are wrapped in linen like a mummy, though I like how his tail wrappings seem to float as if detached from gravity. Just amazing character design here.
When you see that comparison between the live action Khonshu and the comic book version, I think they did a great job of bringing him to life. He looks so cool in this live action realization. There's just sort of this aged look to it that I think lends itself to this character design very, very well.
I mean, the lift door turns it into an elderly woman, but even that doesn't make total sense if you think about it, because if she was at the other end of the hall, she would be nowhere near the summoning button. And despite this elevator previously headed down from the second floor, it's now back up on the fifth floor, where his elderly neighbor is visiting her friend, Claire? And we saw Steven repeatedly hit the button for the ground floor. It should not have gone back up to the fifth. Now, sure, this may just be the building's electrical problems that Steven alluded to, or maybe Khonshu screwing with him, but really I think another example of how basic things in Steven's reality are not abiding by normal logic. Steven turns around and sees Khonshu right behind him. I love this close-up because you can see all the texturing and indentations of Khonshu's skull, like the little hairs wafting out from the back of it. But now when we whip pan to Steven's reaction, he's back on the bus, meaning from the fifth floor to now, Marc must have been in control. We see Khonshu standing on the street, but he disappears when the lamppost crosses frame. On his bus, Steven realizes as he hops off, Harrow was on that bus. So either Marc was pursuing, or more likely being pursued by Arthur Harrow before Steven regained control. Harrow and his followers corner Steven at the museum.
Had Ahmed been free, she would have prevented Hitler and the destruction he wrought. Nero, the Armenian genocide, Pol Pot.
While alluding to history's worst crimes against humanity, Harrow invokes the baby Hitler thought experiment. What if Hitler could have been prevented from becoming the mass murdering dictator? Something Deadpool 2 addresses head on. Harrow goes on to say,
But she was betrayed
Was she?
by indolent fellow gods,
Oh,
by even her own avatar.
avatars. Blue people. Love that film.
By Avatar,
You mean that?
what I mean.
the anime.
yeah, Steven references both James Cameron's Avatar and Avatar: The Last Airbender, but also setting up the mystery of who Amit's original avatar was and why they betrayed Amit. Perhaps influences from the Eternals, or maybe Pharaoh Rama Tut, aka Kang the Conqueror, who also judges people by their futures. When Harrow tries to assess Steven's soul, Amit's scales never settle.
There's chaos in you.
That's because Steven has a completely different moral alignment than Marc does. And the destiny of this total individual is really a complete variable depending on whoever is taking control.
Right.
Now, would that mean that anyone with dissociative identity disorder that Harrow assessed would get the same result? Maybe, but I really think Steven and Marc's condition is amplified by Khonshu's possession, making him uniquely impossible to judge. That night as the museum closes, the crescent moon glimmers overhead, foretelling this as the night Moon Night will finally rise. Steven passes his reflections reflections and the two others remain in the glass. Mark turning back to see what is stalking Steven, in this case the jackal that moves in the foreground, a jackal released by Arthur Harrow to recover the scarab. In another shot, Steven is perfectly framed behind a half-broken bust. Just a really cool way of showing how he is sharing his mind with one of these ancient figures. The jackal appears again behind statues, its eyes glowing. Super creepy. Steven flees into the largest and nicest public museum bathroom I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Steven, you can say this. But I can't have you fighting me this time. You need to give me control. You understand? What control of what? What are you talking about? That thing's about to break through the door.
I love how for all of this, we stay in one take, transitioning through whip pans, but staying in Steven's point of view. At first, the Mark reflection turns to face him while all the other infinite Steven reflections match Steven's movement, but after Steven turns to look at the door and then back to Mark, now only the Mark reflection is there in the mirror. So there may be other infinite identities in this mind, but Mark has the full attention right now. And then the music cuts out as he says,
You're not gonna die. Let me save us.
And so Steven finally looks directly at Mark into his eyes, and the transformation begins. Though notice, while the mummy wrappings envelop our Mark/Steven, in the mirror reflections on the side, nothing is happening. Again, from the standpoint of objective reality, it's hard to really know how much of this is truly real. Flickering on the bathroom walls are glowing hieroglyphics.
Are you sure nothing's happening?
Transformation begins. Though notice, while
I mean, you're seeing like his jacket and his stuff flop all over the place. So like, there's obviously like some kind of a wind effect that's happening, and the light is changing in the reflection. So there's that. I mean, maybe you're not seeing all the wrappings, you know, like you do on him in the middle of the room, but there's certainly an effect going on in the mirror.
Glowing hieroglyphics, and then we cut to outside the.
Hold on. Sorry, I'm looking at the reflection again.
Glowing hieroglyphics.
Yeah, I guess you can't see any of that takeover happening. Or maybe you can. I don't know, man. It's hard to see, for sure. It's a mystery.
And then we cut to outside the bathroom, initially hearing the scuffle, but then sink crashes against the wall and the jackal tries to flee, but Moon Knight tracks him back in. Water pouring down from the broken sinks, giving us another mirrored surface to reflect this character from below. He turns to us, glowing white eyes from behind the mummy wrappings and a hood with a crescent moon sigil and a beaked tip of that hood, evoking the skull of Khonshu. Suspended in his chest, in those mummy wrappings, is his crescent moon weapon. Our final image of the episode leaves us with Moon Knight's eyes, glowing white like the moon. The color white is important to Moon Knight, described amazingly in Charlie Huston's 2006 comics. I don't wear white to hide myself. I wear it so they'll see me coming, so they'll know who it is. Because when they see white, it doesn't matter how good a target I am. Their hands shake so bad they couldn't hit the moon. I just love how this sequence began with our fear for the glowing eyes of the jackal, and it ends with the jackal being afraid of its prey taking on the glowing, terrifying eyes of the hunter. Again, check out our awesome Moon Knight merch over at newrockstarsmerch.com.
So he referenced Charlie Huston, who wrote the comic to Moon Knight. Charlie Huston is one of my all-time favorite writers. I've read several of his books. For those of you who are into fantasy and whatnot, his books are more grounded in its approach, in its nature, super grounded. Like the dialogue feels very street, I guess is the easiest way to put it. But there's a book series he wrote that's like a vampire series. The first one's called Already Dead. I think that's an easy entry into Charlie Huston. I like a lot of what I've read from him. Most of the stuff from Charlie Huston I think is awesome, but I think Already Dead is the easiest one to just like get access into Charlie Huston's style of writing. It's very different. I feel confident in saying it's probably different than most anything else you've read. So if you want something that's interesting, fast read, because the books are usually thin, I definitely pick up Already Dead. About this, as per usual, Eric Voss did a wonderful job of breaking this down. All this Egyptian stuff I'm largely ignorant on. I didn't really start to understand or pay attention to anything Egyptian related as a kid. I'm like, oh, that's a thing, that's cool. Aliens. Exploring the ancient Egyptians through this fictional tale is awesome. While Marvel always has Easter eggs embedded in it, throughout, you'll always find a bunch. I feel like Moon Knight has like very special Easter eggs and references to, you know, the Egyptian stuff. I don't know what you want to call it, the religion or mythology, the history, all of it. There's a lot of like deeper references in here visually, through the names, everything. It's super, super cool to like discover all that. The one with the broken mirror, Eric Voss has pointed out multiple times, but the thing he added on to that I thought was pretty neat was when, not Marc Spector, but Steven turns and his face is behind a face. And I watched the first episode twice, and I didn't catch that. Like, everything's flying by. Of course, he's breaking it down, looking at it, shot by shot. And so to be informed about that, I thought was pretty neat. Like, little things like that I love. And I think the last reference that I didn't catch was I knew it was a Finding Nemo reference. I mean, they straight up call it out, right? At least I think they did. The notion that this fish had one fin and was swimming in a circle, I didn't even think about that. Like, that never occurred to me because I just didn't. Like, I didn't think about, if a fish only has one fin, it's gonna end up swimming like that, which is essentially what he's going through.
Symbolism.
In terms of how Eric Voss was breaking down the elevator scene, how he was pushing this button, but ended up here, and then the grandma lady showed up here. He was like, it doesn't make any sense. I just take that as this sort of artistic licensing. It's like a horror movie in that you get to do whatever you want because he's losing his mind. And so, you have that scene in Fight Club where Tyler Durden is dragging Edward Norton. Well, I forgot which name belongs to which person. But anyway, Brad Pitt is dragging Edward Norton, and you can see on the security cam, Edward Norton is being dragged across the concrete by the person in his imagination, right? His schizophrenia. That's physically impossible, but it's cool. And it's fun to see the imagery of Edward Norton being dragged across the concrete. That's nothing short of magic, because that is not physically possible to do. It's one of those things where it's a movie or a show, as it were, and I just sort of forgive it and go with it because it's fun. It's just like, you get to play with bend the rules of reality because it's, magic and ghostly, and he's schizophrenic. He's losing his mind. He's got a split personality disorder, so I think that's awesome. I'm not even thinking about, like, how come when the button... I guess the last thing I'll comment on is the level of violence that Eric Voss had mentioned, because you see, not Marc Spector, but Steven's hand is full of blood, right? And Eric Voss commented on how this is, like, the most violent or the most bloody we've seen Marvel in some time. And I didn't really think about that. I think that, for me, perhaps because I was expecting a greater deal of violence that didn't really, like, hit me in that way, I was just like, okay, it's just blood. We've seen blood in all kinds of places in Star Wars and Marvel, I feel like, and so that didn't really hit me, but, on second viewing, I'm like, oh, I guess that's like a lot of blood in his hand, so who knows what he had to do to get that back. I think that, for me, the violence that sticks out in my mind from Marvel is when the fake Captain America, like, killed that guy in Falcon and the Winter Soldier with the shield, and you saw the blood on the shield. That was like, whoa. That's like murder, like straight up murder, and everyone's watching. He's got the shield on, it's full of blood. It's stained with murder. That one hit me harder than this, because I think because of all the flashing and whatnot, and you're just trying to keep up with it, I'm not really thinking, oh God, that's really grotesque or anything like that. But that being said, the show is rated for mature audiences now, as I understand, which would put it in line with like Daredevil and whatnot. I guess we can expect that it will get more intense as the episodes go on. You guys, thanks so much for hanging out. Hopefully you enjoyed some of this commentary and reaction. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell icon, please, all notifications, and vote this up. If you feel like hanging out with the Jabs, like in real time, you can go to the youtube.com/JabbyLive. You don't have to. It's there if you want it. So that's it for now. I'm Jabby Kuwait. Peace out.